What sounds like pseudoscience, but actually isn't. The illusory truth effect. People will believe something just because it is repeated, even when they know that what's being said is not true. When an amputee is experiencing phantom limb pains, massaging their stump and then the space where the limb was actually does help reduce the pains, especially if the person is already on the maximum dosage of pain meds and can't have any more. Hearing the hands against the sheets where the limb would be tricks the brain into thinking that it's still there, so it stops the nerves from overfiring as much. Trying to describe otolith/otoconia causing dizziness quickly in layman's terms sounds a lot like quackery. Especially when you start talking about the treatment being an all-natural set of exercises that will help you realign your inner crystals and regain balance. Red heads need more anesthesia than non-read heads. Not sure if this fits the bill, but it's always been fascinating to me. That talk about you changing personalities when switching languages apparently has truth to it. The effect on your dopamine receptors from fantasizing/imagining things. I forget the exact term. As it turns out, you can achieve a pretty high dopamine response from fantasizing/imagining/talking about goals, which can provide your brain with enough happy chemicals to actually hinder your drive to go and achieve those things for real. This sounds like crap, but it's true. You absorb more nutrients from cooked eggs than you do from raw eggs. People don't believe it because cooking eggs actually does reduce the amount of nutrients. But cooking them changes the protein structures and makes it easier for your body to actually absorb them. It's called protein denaturation and it increases the bioavailability of the proteins. Bioavailability describes what is actually available for your body to digest and absorb. More nutrients doesn't necessarily mean more bioavailability and less nutrients doesn't necessarily mean less bioavailability. Neuroplasticity is pretty crazy. Our brains rewire themselves to use new tools so we don't have to think as hard about using them. Picture writing your name and think about how your arm, hand, and fingers all move together to draw the letters. All that incredibly complex movement we don't even think about, our brains just do it. We can use tools like they're an appendage. Some people even learn to use new appendages or senses. Like the third thumb thing from a while back, or the guy who plugged an antenna into his brain that lets him sense electromagnetic fields. Ever heard of epigenetics? It sounds like pseudoscience with its talk of genes being turned on and off by environmental factors, but it's a legit field of study. It's all about how lifestyle and environment can influence gene expression without altering the DNA sequence itself. B.F. Skinner's air crib. In psychology, B.F. Skinner is considered the father of behaviorism, and he wrote a sci-fi book called Walden 2 which featured some of this. What he's less known for today, but was well known for back in his day, was his air crib for babies. It was basically a ventilated and climate-controlled box enclosed by plexiglass. It was padded but similar to a doctor's chair with paper that rolls out and replaced with new paper. In this case it was rolled out for hygiene, messes, etc. And parents who bought and used one for their kids loved it because their kids were content and comfortable. But the masses and media thought it was crazy. They claimed Skinner was nuts and the air crib was basically a terrarium for children. Skinner invented it because his research determined that the main reason babies become upset and cry, besides being hungry, is that they are uncomfortably too warm or too cold. His research showed that if a baby has a perfectly controlled environment and is comfortable, it won't keep waking up at night crying. And parents will get more sleep. Plus, since you didn't need blankets and sheets, nor did the baby need all sorts of clothing to wear, parents didn't have to constantly do laundry. Again, critics ridiculed the air crib, claiming that it was a horrible Skinner box, which was a totally different thing he used for experiments. They even invented stories about babies dying or growing up crazy, and that Skinner's own daughter ended up committing suicide as a result of her being raised in an air crib. Which is funny because Skinner's daughter would later claim that she was very healthy and alive and had no horrible memories of the air crib. Ultimately, the thing that's interesting about the air crib is that it's really just a technological upgrade from the very thing most Finns put their babies in. When a woman in Finland gives birth, they are literally handed a folded up cardboard box and when they get home they unfold it, put a little padding at the bottom, and that's it. No fancy elaborate crib. A cardboard box. The Finns have one of the lowest infant mortality rates on the planet, 2.1 per 1,000 born. By comparison, the United States, Slovakia, United Arab Emirates and Bosnia have nearly the exact same rate, around 5 to 5.1. You can't really buy an air crib anymore because no company is willing to associate itself with the constant criticism of the device, regardless of how successful it was to numerous couples in the 1940s and 50s, but you can build one yourself. Transcranial magnetic stimulation for depression. I told my doctor it sounded like pseudoscience once a long time ago, but I later found out that it really is a legit thing. I haven't actually done it myself though, and I've heard personal reviews on both ends of the spectrum. It's really hard to drown in quicksand, but rather easy in a grain silo. Duct tape occlusion therapy. Basically, you put duct tape on warts for a few weeks and they just straight up disappear. It sounds like the modern version of an old wives' tale, but it's a hell of a lot less painful than other methods, and a roll of duct tape costs practically nothing, so there isn't really any reason not to give it a try. The pseudoscience part is that the research on it is limited. Not a lot of pharmaceutical companies are queuing up to research the medical efficacy of duct tape, but kind of promising. It boils down to 3 studies, all of which have pretty significant methodological issues. A 2002 study found that it had a high rate of efficacy, 85%, compared to 60% for cryotherapy, but it didn't have a control group and it gathered responses via phone interviews after the fact. As studies go, it's not the best design. Two later studies failed to repeat the results of the first study, which would be pretty damning with regards to the whole scientific method thing. But they tested it using clear duct tape, which uses a different kind of adhesive, rubber, to the standard gray, acrylic, tape. Why you'd test an entirely different type of tape is beyond me, but there you go. This has resulted in people suggesting that it might have something to do with the specific adhesive used, as though it stimulates some kind of reaction in the skin that causes the body to attack the wart itself. Additionally, one of the other follow-up studies was criticized pretty harshly in PR review for making statements it couldn't back up. Ultimately, it's just a big gap in our knowledge, but there's at least some scientific evidence for it working. That said, anecdotally I've found it works for me. I had a giant wart on the bottom of my foot for years, and within a few weeks of trying it out it was gone completely. The really weird thing is that I only treated the wart on the ball of my foot and not the heel, and both of them healed up pretty much at the same rate. So there's a study that says it has a high rate of effectiveness, and I've personally found it to work despite me thinking it sounds completely nonsensical before I tried it, but even now it feels entirely made up to me. Mycelium. You're telling me the roots of mushrooms act as a big message delivery system that not only allows information to be sent large distances across a single specimen but can also be used by connected trees to communicate with each other and swap nutrients? This is an oversimplification and mycelium absolutely does not think, isn't sentient, like humans do. However, I am not exaggerating just how implausible it all sounds. There are some amazing mushroom documentaries out there and it still baffles me. Visualizing and mirror neurons. Research has showed that visualizing is actually incredibly powerful. It activates both motor neurons and mirror neurons. Watching someone do a squat with good form and visualizing yourself executing that same motion with good form are almost the same to your brain as physically doing it. So if you're working out, learning a dance, etc., watch videos of other people doing it. Close your eyes and visualize yourself doing it, moving through the motion, and then when you go to do it, it will be easier. Having blue eyes can make you prone to sneezing when exposed to bright light. Some vertigo is caused by loose crystals in your inner ear, and special head positional maneuvers can cure it almost immediately. Sounds really wooey when you explain it that way, but the physiology behind it is pretty cool.